Hello and welcome, guys. Welcome to our YouTube channel SLR The Universal Hub. I'm hoping you and your family are in good health and living a very healthy life. And without further ado in the video, let's start with the today's topic. So, today in this video, we are going to talk about component in ReactJs. So, I previously had explained in the video about the folder structure, how you can run your first React application. And if you didn't watch that video, please go and watch that video. That will also help you to understand the further coming concept in our React Saga series. So guys, what are component? As I explained in my earlier video, in the browser window, in the browser tab, you can create different part. So guys, as I explained in my last video, there can be multiple component. There can be component inside a component, and there can also a component inside that component as well. So you can treat the whole browser window as a one component, and which is having component inside it. For example, we got the left panel component, we got the this middle container component which is having this component inside it. This right panel component we got here. So in React you can create component, and for creating different component you have two primary method in React.js. Those are class component and functional component. So when React was introduced first, there was only existed as a class component. There was no concept of functional component, but after as time passed by, React also introduced the functional component as well. Previously, when there was a class component, function were only used to create the how we create a function programming language. But after introduction of a functional component, most of the people primarily started the functional component because they are easy to use with, uh, as compared to class component. If I'm I say in the term of understandability, functional component are far easier to understand than the class component. In the class component, there are life cycle method as well. Like whenever a component is created in React, it follows a particular life cycle of it. Like when the component first initialize, like rendered on the web page, when there is a component got mounted on the web page, when component is going to unmount on the web page, there are list of life cycle method in class component. But in the functional component you don't have to remember all those life cycle method. But yeah, it is the simplicity of the functional component which primarily excite the developer to go with the functional component instead of a class component. Nowadays React.js then itself suggests to use a functional component instead of a class component. So let's first talk about uh, class component. So how can you create the class component? So for creating the class component, this is the syntax. Using this syntax you can create the class component React.js. You just need to extend the react dot component, and all the syntax and the basic syntax of creating class component is the same as how you create class in normal JavaScript. And initialize the constructor. In the constructor you need to pass this. In the constructor you have to introduce these property props, because whatever property you are going to pass from parent component to child component, it will be accessible inside this property in the constructor. And you also need to call the super method. Inside this constructor you have to call the super method. What the super method will do here, it will call the parent constructor of the app class. Like here app is the child class which is extending component class as a parent, so the super method will call the constructor of a parent class to initialize properties, like how we initialize the class properties in the custom class. And here we got to initialize the state, this dot state as well. So here we have to initialize the state property. So what does state do? It hold all the properties of any react component. If there is going to be change in any of the property of react component, then there is going to be a re-render of the component. So we can initialize any property inside this. And the most important method is a render method. Inside this method you have to return your JSX syntax or JSX, the HTML code in the simple term which you want to render inside that component. So I'll demonstrate it. I'll just type div. Now I'll start this application. So as you are seeing, whatever I have written inside the hello world, it is being displayed here. So now guys, let's talk about lifecycle method in React. So in the React we got a list of lifecycle method, and all the React component follow a particular life cycle, like creation of the component, change in the component, update in the component, and when the component is unmounted, removed from the DOM. From start to till, every React component follow a particular lifecycle path. So let's talk about all those lifecycle method inside the React. One of the method from that life cycle list is this constructor from and the constructor is the first method which is called when any react component is created. It initialize the properties, initialize the state of the component. Yeah, and after that we got a render, uh, and after that we got the render method inside the inside the react class component. So render is the method which will render the JXX. In simple term, you can say as whatever HTML you have written on the DOM, and it will. After that, we got this method component did mount. So what does component did mount do? When your React application got mounted on the web page or the DOM of the browser, if you want to perform some task fetching the data from API or calculating something, then all those things you can do inside this component did mount. And next let's talk about should component update. So what does this method do? In this method you will have the access to the next props and next state property, like the properties and the props which are going to be seen to you after you have done some update in the props or in the state. So you can compare the next you can compare the props from the previous props and the next state to the previous state, and you can return true or false inside this, and you can return true and false inside this method depending on whether something condition are meeting or not. So on true, your all component will be re-render again. It if you return true, the render function will call again your whole the component will render again on the DOM. And if you return false, then there will be going to be no change on the DOM where whatsoever. After this lifecycle method, we got component did update. This lifecycle method is called after your new changes are rendered on the DOM, and inside this method you can perform the task after re-render of your component, like form like any kind of a subscription or network request. After that, we got that we have two special life cycle method. Those are only exclusive to the class component, and till now they are not have been implemented in the functional component. And so if you are primarily working on the functional component, but there will always be going to be one class component which will be handling the error handling for the component. If there are going to be any error, if there are going to be any error in your React component, that class component is the only one which can handle that error. As of now, the functional component didn't have any support for that. And those two special lifecycle method in React are component did catch. The first one is component did catch. So whenever there is going to be any kind of a error in your React component, this component did catch method will be called, and it will be having the property error and the info. uh, by accessing or analyzing the error and whatever the info you got inside those properties, you can tackle the situation if your component got any kind of a error. And apart from component did catch, we got another error handling method in ReactJs, and that is get derived state from error. Inside this method you have to return an object, and this method will be useful to display the fallback UI in case your application encounter any kind of a error. All about the class component. As of now you have to understand it is containing the little bit about basic and advanced concept of the React.js class component lifecycle as well. And now let's talk about we will talk about props and state in another next video, but in this video we are going to only talk about the component. So now move forward with the functional component. So as I demonstrate in front of you, the class component can be more of a complex structure in as compared to functional components. So that's why more of a developer are preferring functional component, and its use of and ease of use of functional component also inspired them to use functional component instead of a class component nowadays. So as I demonstrated previously to you, that was the functional component. And let me this is the functional component. And now compare this functional com and now compare this functional component with the class component. Have you realized how easy it is to implement inside the functional component instead of a class component? uh, but when you have an idea about the class component, that about the functional component, it will also become easy for you. But as a beginner, functional component always seem easier than the class component. So inside the class component you just have to write function app, and inside that you just need to return your JSX syntax, javascript extension syntax. JavaScript extension syntax. This is nothing, this is just HTML if you compare with the HTML, but with a little bit of a difference in the syntax as well. Please don't take me seriously here, because JSX, I'm I'm only saying this JSX is equal to HTML just for beginner to understand. Because JSX syntax is not much a difference from normal HTML5, but there are some difference. Like in normal HTML you just have to write on click. Just for say in normal HTML you just have to write on click, and C in that on click going to be small letter, but that is not in the case in the JSX. The C is going to be capital, and pass the method for passing the and the way to pass the method and assign the method is on click is not similar, is not also similar as of HTML. In the HTML you just have to write the name of the method inside this quotation, but in the JSX you have to pass the name of the method inside the curly braces without that quotation. So this is all about the component in React.js. So let's summarize today's lecture. So there are two kind of a component, class component, and the other is app, and the other is functional component. If you are using the class component, you also have to understand the life cycle method of that class component. Uh, that can be little bit complex as compared to functional component, due to which most of the developer nowadays are preferring using functional component instead of a class component. And so guys, this is it for this video. We'll meet in the next video. On that video we will going to talk about props and state in React.js. Bye bye.